Aloha everyone, young and old, and thank you for watching our program today. Sparky Would Go, a Kaua'i talk show for the whole family. United States Senator Spark Matsunaga was born on October 8, 1916, and raised on Kaua'i, Hawaii. Born Masayuki Matsunaga, the beloved Sparky nickname was given to him by his elementary school friends. Sparky liked the name so much, though, that he legally added it to his birth name after World War II. If we emphasize the life and works of our greatest contributors, people will come to realize that moral courage is bravery of the highest type, and America will be called the champion of peace. Sparky was a political visionary who dedicated his life to peace and a united world. This program series honors those people and organizations who are living examples of how to persevere through the hard times, showing us that our lives are worth living. Aloha everybody, welcome to Sparky Would Go. And boy, I'm so excited today because we have a great storyteller on our hands. Now she would admit to this, but Ada Koene is our special guest, and we're happy that you're able to come today. And I know you're filled with stories, and so let's get right to it.
Yes.
Ada, may I pour you a cup of tea?
Yes, please.
All right,
That would be lovely.
This is Sparky Matsunaga's teapot from his office in Washington, D.C. And we were fortunate enough to be gifted this.
Okay.
And we'll have a little toast to Sparky.
So here's to Sparky.
Yeah. Here's to Sparky Matsunaga.
Quite a guy, huh?
He was. Kampai. Ooh. He drank a lot of tea, I'm told, from his office and spent many long hours at night working on legislation. Well, today we're here with Ada because Ada herself is an interviewer, but as the more I've gotten to know her, the more I've learned that she is, I'm going to call you an adventurous.
Yeah.
And it's very exciting for me because I'm a storyteller person, and I love to tell stories to young people. And so hopefully I can, pick a story that you're telling today and maybe retell it for you. That's how stories keep going and going. We've done an oral history interview biographical sheet. So I'm just going to ask you to start with a couple of questions about your, Now, you were born in South Dakota.
Yeah.
But you lived your growing up years in
Washington State.
In Washington State. And your family moved there to not be part of the weather.
Yeah, well, they said they had a dairy farm in South Dakota. And they said they used to have to go out the upstairs window of the house. So they could walk on the top of the snow and dig down into the barn.
Oh my gosh.
But so they decided one day that they were going to go.
Yeah.
To Washington State. They had heard that the apples were as big as your head. So they thought, well, they could always grow or pick apples. So
yeah.
So my parents had 8 children at the time. Mm-hmm. And no, 9.
And there's 9. And those your siblings.
They had 9 children, and one of my brothers was born in Washington State.
I see.
So my oldest brother stayed back, and he worked in the CCs, but they had the old Model T Ford with a wagon in the back with all the old furniture, and with those 8 children, we all came out west.
And you all got in that Model T?
Yes, yes. And I told my parents, I said, you're really to blame for my wanderlust because I was a year old when you took me on the road. Yeah,
babies know, they certainly know when things are being, babies and cats, you pick them up and move them and they know.
Well, I don't think we had any animals, but
anyway. Now, what part of Washington did you live in, the northwestern?
We went to Yakima, and which is in the central part of the state. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they started a dairy farm. Mm-hmm. And it was at that time, it was a lot of work when we were young, but as I grew older, I realized what a wonderful thing that was to grow up on a farm. I had a cow pony.
Did you start from scratch, or did you come into a buildings that were already built?
No, they rented a house and had a barn, and they bought cattle and started raising cattle.
I see.
And my folks were very industrious, and of course I had 5 brothers at that time, and they could help out.
Yeah, that was the full mission of families in those days, was to have as many kids as children as you could.
They had
so
many
that you
boys.
Could help. Boys, yeah, that's always
everything
great.
was for the boys. My mother would fix a full breakfast, and then she would fix, say, fried chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy for lunch for the boys. And then she would fix a roast beef for the boys, and we girls got to eat too.
Oh, wow, I'm glad that you got to eat.
Yeah.
Tell us about your parents' parents. Now, did they immigrate from another place?
Okay. On my dad's side, my great-great-grandfather they were in southern Germany, and they were invited by Catherine the Great. They had just taken the Ukraine over from the Ottoman Empire, and they needed people to come and grow wheat.
Oh,
so a lot of Europeans, Western Europeans, went to the Ukraine. Mm. Well, then they had promised that the boys would not have to go into the Russian army. And eventually, when Catherine died and so forth, they started drafting. So the elders of the villages heard they were giving land away in the Dakotas. So they sent the elders. They went over and checked it out. Yeah, it was true. It was good for raising wheat. And so they went by the thousands and settled in, say, like Eureka, South Dakota. And
so in those days, people were able to immigrate into the United States from Europe and have the benefits of getting into programs like homesteading and those kinds of things. This is in the late 1800s, I would assume.
Because they needed, that land was not used, and so they needed people to settle. So my I guess it was my grandfather went and settled in the Dakotas. Mm-hmm.
Now, then on your grandmother's side, that family.
Yeah, on my mother's side, my grandfather came from Berlin. Uh-huh. And I don't know why he came to the States. Maybe he came for the 160 acres too. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you never knew them?
No. I guess I did know when I was young, but I don't remember.
I see. And so you grew up in Yakima, Washington, and what was that like?
Well, it's pretty rural. You know, it's a nice little area, but.
Did you play with your sisters and brothers when you had a chance? And were you working really hard?
Of course, we had the dairy farm, so we had a cow pony, and we rode the cow pony, and then we had to do some chores and stuff. And then I took dancing lessons, and I was very athletic, and so I did that. And so
what kind of dance did you take?
What's that?
What kind of dance?
I did tap, ballet, and acrobatics.
Wow. Whoa. And that must have stayed with you your whole life, right?
Yeah, except now.
Yeah. So now, at some point, Ada, this adventure time in your life began. Yeah. You know, you stayed in Yakima, went through school, you became a...
Well, it was my desire. I love kids. Well, I grew up with all these kids, and so I wanted to be a teacher. And just as I was getting ready to go to college, I got trouble with my eyes, and I had migraine headaches so bad I couldn't read.
Oh my gosh.
So finally I got a job at the bank of Seattle First National Bank, and they had a job where I hardly had to use my eyes, so I went to work for them.
Oh, okay.
And I had a couple roommates. We went to high school together, and one of the girls I worked with, her husband was transferred to Honolulu with the United Airlines.
Oh,
and so she got over here to Honolulu, and she wrote, and she said, I don't know why you girls are staying in Seattle. Uh-huh. The weather here is beautiful, and you know it rains all the time in Seattle. And and there are lots of nice guys. So we said, okay, and a month later we were in Honolulu.
So you must have been out right on the edge, ready to do an adventure of
Yeah.
some kind, and
Yeah.
then this was an opportunity
that was
that
it,
just
yeah.
came through for you.
And I was really fortunate. I got a job with E.E. Black Limited, and old-timers will remember the Blacks.
They were a construction company in Honolulu that had a lot of big projects. They were like a Dillingham
oh, yeah.
or something like that.
They did that First National Bank building downtown Honolulu. And
There we
such.
go.
And it was a family-owned, and the owner was E.E. Black, and he was very, very active in the community, very highly respected.
Right, right.
We called him Papa Black.
I see.
And because they were so kind to all of us. When Christmas time, he would rent the country club, the Oahu Country Club, and everybody was invited. And the wives of the workers would come with their slippers on. And
Wow.
stuff. And he'd dance, Papa Black would dance with them all, Mama Black too.
Yeah.
And it was, what a wonderful experience.
And that's the definition, in my point of view, of kama'aina.
Yeah.
The idea of people that really love Hawaii and they
Oh,
share
yeah.
what they have with everybody that works with them or for
Oh, yeah.
them. And Black, I remember E. Black because as part of the Hawaii Community Foundation, they started a fund that really helped a lot of the nonprofit organizations in Hawaii.
Yes, he did, yeah. We were everybody in the office loved working for him.
So what kind of job did you have for E. Black?
Well, I was, they were looking for somebody to work in the engineering department, and they didn't want anybody with experience. They wanted a trainer.
Yes.
So my girlfriend told him, well, Ada's the one for you. So I started working for them, and they trained me. And I just kept taking on more and more and more work until they just couldn't live without me.
Well, they knew when they had somebody that was really great, you know, and they wanted to pile it on, see what you could do.
I used to do all their calculations, and I would prepare for the bid, and I would take the bid down to when they, were calling the bids, and they used to call me Miss Black.
Miss Black, because you were so intimately involved in everything of the company, right?
The vice presidents of the companies would go to these bid openings.
Yeah.
And here I was, this young girl, Miss Black, and they thought that was really something.
Well, you were the person with the bid from the Black company.
Yeah,
right?
well, Papa Black loved it. He loved the stories when they would tell him that, boy, you really have somebody there.
So it seems like you had a great situation and a perfect job and everything going well. How come you just didn't get married and start a family right then?
Well, I didn't meet the right guy, for one thing.
Okay.
And secondly, one of my girlfriends was dating a guy out at Schofield. And his job was, it was during Vietnam was just starting up.
Early 60s.
And we had guys from Thailand, South Vietnam, Taiwan, Indonesia, and there was one other country I forgot. They were teaching languages to the U.S. soldiers. So,
in Honolulu.
Out at Schofield.
At Schofield, right.
And so one day the Thai fellows said, I'm getting so weak. I haven't had any rice for a couple of months, and just too weak. Do you think we could come and cook at your house?
It's just like Thai people and Vietnamese people. They have to be cooking.
Yeah.
You know.
and they have to have the rice.
Right.
And they weren't serving rice out at Schofield. So we said, sure, you can come in. Well, when they came, they brought this Thai general with them. He had been touring the mainland, and he was so weak.
Oh, yeah.
So he wanted some rice, too.
Yeah, yeah.
So I got to know them, and they said, the general said, there is a school, an engineering school in Bangkok that they're looking for an English teacher. Would you be interested?
So he saw potential in you right away. He knew that. Okay, I get it.
So I decided to do it.
Wow.
But when I got out to Bangkok, it was way in the countryside, and I wasn't prepared to be a Peace Corps worker. So I told the general, I don't think this is for me. And he said, oh, that's okay. And so I went down to the embassy, U.S. Embassy, and asked her if there were any American engineering companies in town. And he gave me the names of a couple of them. and the very first one hired me.
Wow.
So I worked for them. Their office manager wanted to go on leave, and I was to work for them until she came back. Well, then, in the meantime, I went to the other engineering company, and they were out of Honolulu.
Ah.
And so they said, well, okay, well, as soon as you're ready, we need an assistant office manager. So I went to work for them.
Now, here you are in Bangkok, and you're on your own, essentially just a single woman on your own in the 1960s.
I know, and there were not many American ladies on their own. Yeah.
Yes, and so, but there's something that kept you there. I mean, it was work, yeah, that's true, and the exoticness of it. Were you a sightseer person? Were you a tourist person? What did you enjoy about the place?
I met an Australian lady. She was working for an advertising company, and we became good friends.
Right.
And then in the meantime, I met this Hawaiian lady working for the U.S. Navy right up the street. So she said, there are a bunch of Hawaiians down in Pattaya. Why don't we go down one weekend, because they have parties every weekend. So I said, well, okay, I'll go. Well, it turns out Hawaiian Dredging had gotten this big project, and they brought all these Hawaiians and the mixers and such.
Oh my gosh.
And so I got to know them, and they had parties every weekend. The only problem was they couldn't have any luau's because they didn't have the emu stones. And there were no volcanoes in Thailand.
And did they recognize that you had spent time in Hawaii, and were they happy about that? Okay, good.
And they knew I had APO privileges, military privileges. So they started sending emu stones in these ammunition boxes until they had enough. Well, of course, obviously, if somebody in Hawaii knew what they needed, we finally got enough emu stones. But then the next problem was the poi. There was no wet
but
taro.
the Thai people do grow taro, right?
Yeah, but only the dry taro.
Okay.
And these Hawaiians were used to the wetland taro.
Right.
So, but anyway, one of my friends, Esther, who was from Maui, she said, well, we tried to make poi out of the dry taro, and it worked out pretty good. So they started making poi. Oh, in the meantime, they had been mailing poi to me from Hawaii. And one day I went to the post office, and the sergeant handed me 2 packages of poi.
Just bags of poi?
Yeah, 2 bags of poi.
Oh,
and I said, where's the rest? And he said, we don't know. That was the last poi I got through the mail, because I'm sure everybody's mail got all stuck together with this poi
right.
broke. Yeah.
Now, isn't it true, Ada, that usually, in particular Hawaiians, when they travel somewhere else, they really love to stick together in their own cultural context, and they love to recreate their Hawaiian lifestyle if they can, as much as possible.
Yeah.
That's true with other cultures too, right?
Well, they were not all Hawaiians. Some were Chinese and such, but they had enough people who could sing and play music, enough girls who could hula, and so we just had more luau's than I've ever been in my life, more than I've ever had in Hawaii.
And you've lived in Hawaii for 20 years too.
So one day, one of the guys said, Auntie Sissy is here with her husband, and they live on a compound, and all the guys have Thai girlfriends, and Auntie Sissy is the only American. So would you go down and see her? Well, I had this tape recorder, and so I thought, well, I'll just take some Hawaiian music and such and go see Auntie Sissy. Well, I put the music on, and she started to cry. The music was by her sons, the Kaho'anu Lake Trio.
Oh my gosh. You had brought that music?
Her 2 boys, and that just happened to be the music I brought.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God. Well, after that, it was love at first sight. She just loved me dearly. Well, it turns out that later I find out that she's married to the last prince of Hawaii, David Quananekoa.
Yes.
But he had passed. And she remarried this guy who worked for the U.S. Navy.
I see.
But we became dear, dear friends, old friends. But
so now that's a big part of the travel adventure, really, is to meet people in exotic places that are either connected to your back home or become your traveling companions in the future, right?
Yeah.
All right, so you're in Bangkok and you're still on this adventure. What happens next?
Well, then we were, they wanted me to go to the Saigon office, and I wasn't really very enthused about that. So then they got this project in Seoul, Korea. And they asked me to go. This is the
contractor that you were working for, the engineer.
Yeah, out of Honolulu.
Yes.
And it was a big project. It was a study. It was the United Nations Development Program was giving this to the government of Korea because Korea was just recovering from the war. Yeah. And they had started manufacturing, and they needed ports to ship it out. So they gave this project to Line Associates out of Honolulu, was the main contractor, and then they had a group of from Norway. They were the shipping people, and then the Economist Intelligence Unit out of London, and then we had a Japanese group, and then we had an American group that was going to do the container terminal.
So this is a contract that's a world-class contract.
Oh, yeah.
And it has to do with developing ports in South Korea after the war. Yeah. And what you just described is an international effort from all these different countries of people that are contributing to the growth and development of South Korea. How did they all come together? What part did you play?
Well, they all submitted proposals, and then so they got together and negotiated as a team.
I see.
But we had an American group that were doing the container terminal, but they were these kind of guys that would go around and say, "Oh, do this and do that," and
consultant.
When it came down to writing a report, they couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So they walked off the job.
Yeah.
So here we were. We had to get the product. We had 9 reports. Had to get them by a certain date. Get them to Washington D.C. And we didn't have the container terminal. So my boss called the head of the Rotterdam container terminal, told him who he needed, and he said, "I have just the guy for you." Ah. So they sent Ari, and it turned out to be the guy for me. And eventually, we got married.
The guy that the company brings over as a hired gun, if you will, becomes your partner.
Yeah.
And
yes.
Oh my gosh, that's sort of serendipitous.
Oh boy. Ari and I were effectively at that time working for the Korean government.
Yes.
And we were the first people that they had ever had in as contractors. So this was totally new to them. And so we were getting a living allowance, and we thought, if we tell them and make it official, then they may feel that they have to take the living allowance away from one of us. So we thought, well, we won't make it official.
Well, you had to live like the Koreans live.
They all knew, but nobody said a word, you know. And so, but we got along really well with the government people, and I think there were about 150 of us in the office. We had 30 Americans, and I was the office manager. And one day I was on vacation in Honolulu and then Seattle, and my boss called me and he said, "Ada, hire another Ada." And I said, "Well, what for?" And he said, "We're going to have so many people in that office, you can't do it." So I advertised in Honolulu, had 2 really good girls. And then I advertised in Washington State. And this girl calls me from Eastern Washington, that's 200 miles away, and she said, "I want to come for an interview." And I told her, I have 2 really good girls, and this girl was quite young and not much experience. But she said, "I really want to do it. I really want to go overseas." So I said, "Okay, you can come, but I'm not promising anything." So after she left, my brother had been reading the CVs of the 3 girls, and he said, "If I were you, I would hire the wheat truck driver." I said, "What? What wheat truck driver?" "Well, the one that just left. didn't you read her CV? And he said, she drives wheat truck in the summer months when she's not going to school. So I hired her. I called my boss and I said, you may think I'm crazy. And he said, well, you have to work with her. We're still good friends. We still text each other every day.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Well, I remember the project manager said, oh, I don't want 2 American women. They're going to fight all the time. Well, about 4 or 5 months later, he said, I wish you 2 didn't get along so well. All you do is talk. And I said, well, if we're not getting our work done, just tell us. No, I have no complaints, but all you do is talk.
What was Ari's job during this time?
Well, he was the container terminal specialist. And he helped design the Euro container terminal in Rotterdam, which was the largest in the world at that time.
Well, we could use his help
Oh,
now.
I know. That I've been thinking lately and telling people we could use him now.
Yeah.
Because he must be turning over in his grave with all those container terminals.
Backed up.
Yeah, well, it was his job to see that they went in and out, and that's why we traveled around the world, because if somebody had a problem and the shipping companies were complaining, they would call on Ari, and he'd come down and solve the problem.
So you 2 were living happily. You were busy as all get out. And what was in your future at that time?
So anyway, we knew that after we finished that project in Korea that he would go back to the old company he worked for before. And they were a consulting firm, and they would be sending him out overseas. So we decided not to have children at that time because I wanted to go with him. And so we might be, one day we'd be sent to Durban, South Africa for a few months. And we'd come back home, and then they would send us to Cairo, Egypt. And it was really wonderful. We traveled together so well.
So it was in the 1970s at this time that you were doing these kind of consultations around the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And what was the thing that tied those places together for you, besides his work? I mean, was there things that you liked to do together, bicycle around the town or visit the mosque or the church?
He was, both of us were very curious about cultures. We loved the cultures and learning about the different cultures. And we had picked up a lot of that in Korea because the Korean culture was really old. And when we were in Korea, the Korean people could not travel because they didn't have the foreign currency. So everybody who could speak some English wanted to have an American friend. And then they could practice their English and get better. So I was very lucky that I met this really darling lady. And she had been a stewardess and so spoke English pretty good. But her husband was the Gregory Peck of Korea.
Oh, a movie star.
Yeah, but it was very cute because they had no money in those days.
Yeah.
He might be making 5 films at one time.
Wow.
And he'd have to make himself up at home to go to work.
He looked like Gregory Peck, right?
Yeah. But if he was playing a beggar, he would stop some guy in the street that had poor clothes, and he would buy his clothes off of him.
Oh, my gosh.
Anyway, through them, we met so many people. And we really began to feel like we were Koreans.
He was a recognizable star to all Koreans for the most part. And so you were his friend, and whenever you got together, you were part of the entourage.
Oh, we always got the best seat in the house and so forth. But we would have them over for dinner because they wanted to taste all the foods. And of course, I cooked foods from a lot of different countries. And so maybe I'd have a French meal, and they'd come over. And right away, they'd pick up the Tabasco. Yeah. And I'd say, no, you taste it first, so you know what it tastes like. Then you can put on the Tabasco. But everything had Tabasco.
Ada, can you say something in Korea for us?
Well, let's see. A little bit is Jokum Kadari Seo.
Jokum Kadari Seo.
Yeah.
And tell us the meaning of that.
That's just a little bit, if you please.
Oh, that would be like the Tabasco then.
Yeah. So anyway, then at some point, one of my nephews wanted to come out for a visit. He wanted to stay for a month. And he was getting kind of bored. Oh, I thought I wasn't going to work for another month, and so I could show him around. But it just well happens I had to go into the office, so he was getting kind of bored, was getting ready to go back, and I introduced him to a couple of guys in the office, a couple of engineers, and they were looking for a gopher, and so they hired him.
Oh.
And that 1 month turned into 6 years.
Oh my gosh.
And when he went home, he had this very, very sweet Korean bride and a little boy.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and they're still married. 43 years later, they're still married, and the little boy has a little girl, and she's just the cutest little thing.
Would you say that the Korean culture, South Korean culture, and culture in the United States are a good match? People's values and...
Well, the Koreans, there are quite a few Koreans living in that part of Yakima now, and they all seem to be very comfortable there.
So there's cultural exchange that happens through business and through commercial ventures that is kind of under the radar. We don't see it quite as much. And there's something about you as a performer in Korea that's very interesting as a dancer.
Yeah, well, the different counties in South Korea would have these big competitions, and they'd fill a football field of dancers, and they would do these different dances, and they'd compete. They were judged, and well, my friend Vonda and I thought it was so interesting. You know, what did these steps mean? And so I mentioned to one of the guys in the office one day, I said, I would be, do you know of anybody that teaches Korean dancing? And he said, yes, I know of Miss Lee, and she teaches over at the Army base. And so the next day, here comes Miss Lee into the office. Oh. So Vonda and I decided to take 1 year of dancing lessons.
Korean dancing. Now this is in costume as well, right?
Yeah. And so Vonda was transferred to the southern part, to Busan. So I stayed in Seoul, and I kept dancing. I just loved Miss Lee. And so we would go out into the countryside and watch the dancing. We went to they had shamans there, you know. Say if a girl in a village was not eating and threatening to kill herself or something. Yeah. Well, the people of the village would call this shaman to come in and dance and pray the evil spirits to leave.
Shaman as a holistic healer, looking at all of the aspects of you that might have created ill health. Yeah. And helping you to go through those and bring back health. But
so we would go to a village that was having a shaman, and we would pick up some of her steps. Oh. But one of the interesting things is that she would have this, well, it's not a sword, it was like a machete, and she would walk across that sharp edge of that machete and not even cut herself.
Well, you were very well admired for your taking the dance as an American taking Korean dance. And you were honored as well.
Yeah, so what happened was that when the Japanese were there, the Koreans could not speak their language, they could not dance their dances, they could not sing their songs. So when we came in and we started taking dancing lessons, and some of the guys would start singing and so forth, so one of the owners of an English language newspaper started this competition for foreigners. Aye. And so they talked me into entering, and I won the Outstanding Award.
Outstanding Award?
Yeah.
That's a Korean
that's
dance.
The picture.
And we'll show you a photograph. That's so great. You know, for me, that links back to our mission with Sparky Would Go, because it has to do with what kind of a place is left in such cultural shambles as the Japanese invasion of a place like Korea, and then the people not able to speak their language, not able to, dance their cultural dances or play their music. To me, that is that's a kind of challenge that we like to try to uncover there.
It was very sad. I mean, we had a driver who could only speak Japanese. Yeah. And they spoke broken Korean, but we could kind of understand him, Mr. Shim. I'll always remember him.
Tell us that story about, remember when two people left your business, your commercial venture, and then they were...
that wasn't in Korea.
Where was that?
That was in China.
Okay.
We were in Xiamen, China, which was a port city across from Taiwan. And the Chinese had wanted to borrow money from the Asian Development Bank. And the Asian Development Bank said, you have to have a study first. So they were not very happy about it. And we were hired to do it. Our former boss out of Honolulu. Mm-hmm. And so we went to do the project. We had counterparts with the Chinese government and our team, which consisted of a lot of us that had worked together in Korea and such. Mm-hmm. So, but things didn't go very smoothly. The project was for them, but they just did everything they could to keep us from doing a good job. And finally, we finished and submitted our report and left. Well, about 2 months later, we had a call from our former project manager, and he said, you know, Miss Ko, and I forgot the guy's name, yeah. Well, they found that they were smuggling oil in through the port, and they took them out and executed them.
Wow, so the people that were your counterparts in China
just
were
within
doing
2 months, they were shot.
They were doing something that was not acceptable to the government, and so they took them out and boom, shot them.
Boy, I tell you, that's pretty creepy. You know?
No. And again, that's the time in the world that you were in Asia and that during that time frame.
Yeah. Well, one cute thing, once a week we would go out and have Chinese food with our Chinese counterparts. And they would pick the restaurant, and the Xiamen is near Sichuan, so they had a lot of hot food. Mm-hmm. But we would go out, and the Chinese would order. And sometimes you'd get something that we didn't know what it was, and we'd say, "What is this?" Don't ask.
Oh yeah,
we kept getting this.
Stick.
Yeah, we kept getting. Don't ask.
Yeah, when I was in China, I was served a scorpion on a stick, and you're just looking at this thing going. But you know, I mean, I think just the adventure of it. For me, I'm always getting from one of your stories, Ada, that the adventure is really. You're not holding back. You're going for broke. You're in these situations and you're learning all the time and going through what's.
No, and one very interesting thing, Xiamen had been a stronghold for the British, and there's an island right off called Gulangyu, right off of Xiamen, and there are a lot of beautiful old British homes there, and they had a museum, and. We would go, we went to everything, and in that museum was a painting, and it was a boat, a rather small boat, but the whole deck was full of Chinese standing there, getting ready to sail off. You know where they were going?
No.
To Hawaii to work in the plantation.
Oh my gosh. So it was one of those ports that had their immigrant people come to Hawaii to work in the plantation.
Yeah. So I tried to get, for our book, we haven't talked about my book yet, for my book, I tried to get that picture.
Oh, okay.
And I went through every which way I could. I never did get that picture. I was ready to get on a plane and fly there myself.
Oh my gosh. All right, let us do that. Now, let's bring you back to Hawaii there. You and Ari back in Hawaii. Why did you come back to Hawaii?
Okay, well, at some point, you know, the weather in Holland is like it is in Seattle and Portland. Rains. Mm-hmm. Most of the time it's gloomy, rainy.
Yeah.
And so Ari had retired. He was 75 at the time, because they kept asking him. There were not too many people that did this kind of work. But we had stopped in Hawaii several times when we were living in Korea. And so one day he said he was tired of the weather, and he said, "Let's get the hell out of here." So I said, "Okay, where do you want to go?" Well, we decided Hawaii. But I said, we had lived in Cairo and Buenos Aires and, and Durban, all these big cities. I said, let's go to a quiet place. So we came to Kaua'i.
So you and Ari moved to this island, not
Yeah.
even Honolulu. You decided on this island. Had you come here before? Kaua'i
Yes,
before?
I had been here before.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where did you live when you came here?
Well, I was living in Honolulu at the time, but we came for visits. So then we bought a place in Poipu, and it wasn't finished yet. Mm-hmm. And we had a motorhome on the mainland, so we went back up there, and it was on the morning of September 11th that we saw the airplanes going into the.
Oh wow!
We were had just gotten up, we're having coffee, and saw the airplanes go in.
And did you have a feeling like the whole world was going to change?
Oh, yeah.
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 And especially because, you had traveled so many places and there was nothing like that had ever come into your world. Yeah. So your choice to live on Kaua'i, now, you don't sit still. That's pretty obvious.
No.
Okay. So what tickled your fancy and moved you forward here and got you excited about something here?
Well, so it wasn't long that I got acquainted with Helen Lakono over at the market in
Sure.
Kukui'ula. And I would go and sit and talk to her, and tourists would come in and say, Helen, you promised this recipe, and next time you come, I'll have it. So finally I said, Helen, let's do a book on your recipes. And so, okay. So I did the photography, she cooked the soups, and I did the photography and edited everything, and we came up with a cookbook.
Oh,
and she really
she's a Hanapepe girl. She was here,
she really sold a lot of those books.
I'm sure.
In fact, Talk Story Bookstore keeps asking me when they're going to reprint, and I've been after Andrea to do that. Mm-hmm. And then Elvreen was doing the haku, and I
now
took...
this is Elvreen Chow.
Chow.
And she is a famous laymaker. We know her from being a preschool teacher at kids' school.
Oh,
in
yeah,
Papa,
yeah, with Phyllis Kunimura.
But there she has a whole nother life as a
Yeah,
laymaker.
yeah.
Right?
So I had been taking pictures of people that she had made hakus for, mm-hmm. and so finally I said, Elvreen, we got enough for a book, and so we did a book. And then Melissa found out about the two books that I did.
McFerrin.
Yeah, Melissa McFerrin. She was the assistant manager at Kukui Grove at the time.
Right.
And so they came to me, she and Phyllis came to me and said, we want to write a book about Koloa plantation days.
Now, take us back just a little bit, because Melissa McFerrin had been the producing person of the festival, Koloa Plantation Days, and Phyllis Kunimura from Koloa was a major force.
She was the mother of Koloa Plantation Days.
The mother of Koloa Plantation
So they had
Days.
been interviewing people with the idea that eventually they would do a book.
Yeah, okay.
And so then they approached me and asked me if I would do it. Well, I had written a couple books of my own, and I had written travel articles while I was traveling around the world. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I said, okay. So we got together on that, and but the thing was that the people they'd interviewed were mostly the people that were involved with the putting
event.
On the plan. Yeah.
Sure.
So I said, well, I want to talk to people that were down cutting the sugar cane.
People that built the plantation in Koloa.
I want to talk to people that were really involved. So then, who were they? How to find them? Well, I went to Kupuna Day at the Koloa Neighborhood Center, and I said to the ladies, is anybody here? Did you ever work on the plantation or anything? One lady, Rose Samana, but her stories were so priceless.
Yeah.
She was 95.
Wow.
And she remembered everything.
Uh-huh.
And almost every story she told me is in that book.
Uh-huh.
And then somebody was up at Kalaheo Missionary Church and said, oh, there's a lady up there that remembers everything, and and she would really like to talk to you. So I went up. turns out they were in pineapple, and she was from Kalaheo.
Oh, okay,
And I wanted people in sugar from Kaloa. So I told her, I'm really sorry. And she said, well, you want to talk to Mamo. And that's how I got to talking to Mamo.
Mamo kind of show. And you become friends with Mamo.
Oh, yes.
And you guys are connected in very, very great ways.
Well, Mamo doesn't drive anymore. And he would call me and say, Ada, I have to go to Biltone and get my hearing aid fixed. Can you drive me? Sure, Mamo, I'll take you. And boy, I'll tell you, wherever we went, everybody knew him. Hi, Uncle Mamo. Hi, Uncle Mamo. And there would be stories. Then I met a lady that went to kindergarten with Mamo.
And the guy's 90-something.
She said, is that Mamo Kaneshiro in your car? And I said, yes, it is. And she said, hi, Mamo. And I said, Mamo, do you know her? Yeah, hi, Lucille. I went to kindergarten with her.
95-year-olds remembering their kindergarten days, right?
Then she started to tell me the story. Her father had been the manager of the Kukui Ula McBride store.
I see.
And then they had moved up, and she went to the Kaua'i Union Church. And Kaua'i Union was having a picnic and overnight stay down at Poipu Beach. Mm-hmm. And she decided to go along. That was December 6, 1941. And the next morning they woke up, and she said the skies were just full of these airplanes.
Yeah.
All going back. She said, we didn't hear any bombing or anything. We just heard the airplanes flying
the
back.
bombers flying back, yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. So let me see if I can tie this together a little bit. You were commissioned to write a book. You interviewed many people, and we can see that book, right? And the book is finished.
Well, the book is finished, but we went through Simon & Schuster. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they're pretty particular. So they're going over it now to check for plagiarisms and stuff. So, and we've picked out the pictures. Oh, the people have been so good about this. Mm-hmm. Clara Herr over at Hawaii State Archives called me, Ada, I have a picture I think you'd like.
Yeah, that's
Should I send it? Yeah. So many people, Grove Farms gave us a DVD full of photographs. Then I called the Paniolo Preservation Society on the Big Island. Do you have any photographs? How can I find out what pictures you have? Mm-hmm. Oh, you want to talk to Dr. Billy Bergen. He's written 4 books about the Paniolo. And so I called Dr. Bergen. He sent me a flash drive full of
Oh, that's so amazing.
Paniolo.
That's so amazing.
People have been so, I've had over 50 people give me photographs. Mm-hmm. I've interviewed over 70 people.
I see.
And that was
so when are we going to see this book?
Well, I asked Melissa that last night. I said, I know Mark is going to ask. And she said, well, next year, hopefully in the spring.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, well, the thing is that hopefully we'll be able to have Kloa Plantation Days next year.
Yeah.
Jimmy Miranda has told me they're going to have the rodeo. So if not the parade, we'll have some of the, you know, like the visit of Kanealuma and things like that. But we'll have something. And then we wanted to have a big book launch.
Okay.
And we have to invite everybody I talked to and everybody who gave us pictures. So right there, we've got over 150 people.
You've got a plantation days just from the people who are in the book. Let's bring it to a close. I think we're going to have to do another interview, Ada. But let's bring it to a close. But I want you to talk about what's in front of you now. Based on your experiences that you've gone through in your life, how could you, stay vital, feel like you're contributing? Do you have any projects that are kind of out there and you'd like to really kind of tackle?
Well, I have a feeling that that something will come up.
Oh yeah, certainly.
I'm in my 80s, so I'm not ready to stay home and feel sorry for myself. My dear friend Anna Slagat was driving till she was 100.
Yeah, I remember her.
Yeah, and we were playing bridge with her when she was 104, and she said, I'm not having a birthday party this year, but when I'm 105, we're going to have a bash. So I want to be like Anna.
Okay, I get it. I get it.
Yeah, and another dear friend is Bobby Waterhouse McCord. Her great-great-grandfather was the only doctor on the island for 40 years. And then Dr. Waterhouse was her great-grandfather. She's 90. Her husband is 94. About once a month, he makes us lunch, and we have lunch together. And Bobby is just the sweetest lady you'd ever want to know.
Well, that's how this next project is going to come to you. It's just, I call it serendipity. You start to connect with people, especially people within the history of Kaua'i, and the next thing you know, there's something growing there. Thank you so much for coming. We're gonna close. Is there any final thought you want to give us?
One thing I was going to say, one day, we had, in the book we said that Kaua'i rum had planted some sugar cane in Kaua'i, down across from the ballpark, and that we had heard that they were going to build a museum and a distillery. And so I called their shop down at Kilohana, and she said, well, let me have somebody call you. So the person that called was Bob Gunter, who is the CEO and president of Kaua'i Rum. And he was so excited about this book because they are going to build a restaurant and a museum, and they're going to have 2 old plantation houses, and they're going to give tours to show the people how they cut the sugar cane and so forth.
Great.
And so he was so excited that we had a book that was telling all about it. So
I can't wait till the book comes out.
Yeah.
And I think that's what holds Kaua'i together better than anything else in the face of changes, is to remember your history, remember your past.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for reminding us of all that, Ada.
Yeah.
And the strength of your story, I think, is going to definitely be living into the future for a long time.
Well, there was one more story. I was out to have my COVID shots out at KVMH, and there was a Filipina lady sitting across from me. And we started talking, and it turns out she was born down by the new mill camp. So we got to talking, and she wanted to talk to me, but she became ill. So she wrote some answers for me, and the daughter wrote and said, my mother is so happy to be able to tell her story. And she said, thank you for giving her that chance.